Has someone ever tried to make you feel guilty for choosing yourself?
They didn't even hesitate. I remember the exact moment my mother dropped the line like it was nothing, as if I were just a neighbor she barely knew, not her daughter. We were sitting in her kitchen, the same one I used to clean every Sunday morning like clockwork, thinking that maybe acts of consistency could buy me a seat at the emotional table. Rachel was already sipping on a chilled glass of white wine, her fingers clicking away at her phone like she was too important to exist in the same physical space as me. And then Mom smiled, tight-lipped, polished, too sweet to be sincere, and said, "We're taking Rachel to Greece for her birthday. It's going to be first class all the way. A real celebration." She paused, her smile growing even more artificial, like she was about to deliver a punchline. "But we figured you wouldn't enjoy that kind of thing anyway, Megan." Just like that. That was the sentence. You wouldn't enjoy it anyway. It echoed louder than any insult I'd ever been given in my life, because it wasn't just careless, it was chosen. Deliberate. That moment was not about the vacation or even about Rachel. It was about erasing me, gently and permanently, with a smile. And the worst part? Nobody in that room flinched. Not Rachel, not Dad, not even the dog, who usually barked when tension broke out. Nothing. Just silence, and the hum of the refrigerator filling in the space where someone should have stood up and said, "Wait a minute." There wasn't even an extra seat booked. No casual offer to pay my way, no "you're welcome to join," not even a pity invite. Just assumptions. Because that's how it's always been with them. I was the utility daughter. The one you called when your printer stopped working or when someone needed to be driven to the airport at 4 in the morning. I was the spare tire of the family. Useful in emergencies, but no one wanted me visible when things were going well. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I smiled, nodded, and said, "You're probably right." Then I stood up, excused myself, and drove home through Indiana's flat gray roads while my knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. I don't think I turned on the radio. I just needed to hear the sound of nothing to match what they made me feel. It was a quiet I was starting to get familiar with, the kind that wraps itself around your ribcage like a memory you never really dealt with. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, and I realized something. I'd been playing a part in my own erasure for years. Every time I swallowed disappointment, every time I said, "It's fine," every time I showed up with a gift for someone who forgot my birthday, I was building the case that I didn't need to be seen. And now they believed it. Now it was real. I had made myself unnecessary. The only thing left to do was finish what they started. It took me exactly 3 hours to make the decision. I checked my PTO balance, 31 days unused. I cleared my calendar. I packed everything that mattered, which turned out to be surprisingly little. Some clothes, a hard drive, and a box of family photos I wasn't even sure why I still kept. I didn't slam doors or leave dramatic notes. I just went. The spare keys I always kept on the hook in their mudroom? Gone. The storage closet in the basement that I paid for because Rachel's baby stuff was taking up too much room? Empty. The family group chat that buzzed with gifts and meal plans and plans I was never a part of? Muted. Then left. No goodbye. The day they boarded the plane to Mykonos, I boarded one to nowhere. A one-way rental car with no clear destination, just a need to be far enough away that I could finally hear my own thoughts without their voices layered over the top. I turned off my phone halfway through Ohio. I figured if anyone noticed I was gone, they'd call once. Maybe twice. Then they'd move on, like they always did, probably telling themselves I was just being sensitive again. Let me ask you something and answer honestly, because I think a lot of us have been here in one form or another. Have you ever been so casually dismissed by your own family that it felt like your existence was optional? Like you could vanish and no one would lose sleep? Have you ever looked at the people who raised you and wondered how they managed to know so little about who you are? Because that was me. That was the moment. Greece wasn't the betrayal. It was just the symptom. The real wound was older, deeper, buried under years of being useful but never valued. I drove for 2 days. Slept in motels. Ate bad gas station sandwiches. And the entire time, I wasn't angry. I was calm, frighteningly calm. Like I was finally slipping out of a jacket I'd been forced to wear my entire life. That's when I started planning, not revenge exactly, but something close. A reset. A removal. If they wanted a life without me so badly, I figured it was time to give them one. By the time their first photos from Santorini hit Facebook, Mom in oversized sunglasses, Rachel posing on a yacht with her perfectly curated friends, Dad looking mildly uncomfortable in linen pants, I had already stripped my name off every legal document that connected me to them. Removed emergency contacts. Changed my mailing address. Redirected my bank statements. It was meticulous, methodical, and strangely empowering. I wasn't erasing myself. I was erasing their version of me. When they came home, they'd walk into a house that looked exactly the same until they noticed the silences. No framed photo of me in the hallway. No labeled leftovers in the fridge. No text from me asking if they needed anything from the store. Just quiet. They always said I was dramatic when I brought up how they treated me. So this time, I didn't bring it up. I brought it down. Quietly, completely, and without warning. And the best part? I knew they'd never see it coming. Because when someone's been invisible to you long enough, you stop looking for them. Even when they're already gone. You can't really understand the weight of being left out unless it's happened to you so many times that it stops feeling like a surprise and starts feeling like some unspoken family tradition. The kind no one writes down or admits to out loud, but everyone knows by heart. That was my reality for as long as I could remember, not some isolated moment of exclusion, not one particularly cruel birthday or graduation that passed without recognition, but a lifetime of small, sharp decisions where I was always the background character in my own family's story. And this whole Greece situation? That wasn't the beginning of anything, it was the inevitable end of a long, slow erosion that had started decades ago. I've always had this theory that families don't break in one clean snap like a branch. They rot, quietly and patiently, from the inside out. One forgotten call here, one excuse there, and eventually you wake up and realize you've been orbiting your own parents like some distant planet they don't even look up at anymore. Growing up, I learned early that Rachel's needs came first, not because she was fragile, or because life was harder for her, but simply because she was louder, shinier, more fun to be around. The kind of person who made other people feel special just by liking them, while I was reliable, responsible, the one who didn't need much. And that's what they loved about me. Or, to be more accurate, that's what made me easy to ignore. I could give you 100 examples, but most of them wouldn't sound dramatic enough to matter to anyone else. The time I spent my 20th birthday in a hospital bed after an appendectomy, and the only person who showed up was Aunt Denise, carrying a single pink grocery store balloon and a thermos of soup. Or the Christmas where Rachel cried because she didn't get the boots she wanted, and Mom gave her mine off my feet, like it was a fair trade, while I stood there barefoot on the tile in silence. Or how every family group photo had me shoved to the side, just out of focus, while Rachel got the center every single year. So when I packed up and drove off into the Midwest without telling a soul, it wasn't revenge. It was an answer to a question they never bothered to ask. What happens when the one who always shows up finally decides not to? For the first few days, I didn't feel anything. I rented a small place near Lake Superior that I found through a coworker who owed me a favor, an old summer cabin someone had stopped maintaining after their parents passed. It smelled like dust and cedar and loneliness, and for the first time in a very long while, I felt like I was somewhere I belonged. Not because it was warm or welcoming, but because it didn't expect anything from me. I didn't have to smile or make small talk or pretend like I was happy to be there. I could just exist, unobserved and uninterrupted. I left no breadcrumbs. No text messages, no social media updates, no vague posts designed to stir worry or concern. I simply disappeared, like smoke slipping out through a crack in the window. At first, I thought maybe someone would notice right away. I expected at least a text from Mom asking why I hadn't confirmed the pickup time for her next doctor's appointment, or maybe a call from Dad, confused about a bill he wanted me to look over. But nothing came. Not for the first day or the second. It wasn't until the third day, after their flight had landed and the Greece photos started flooding in, that I saw the first notification. Rachel, in the family chat, "Where's Megan?" 3 words. That was it. Not even a tag. No urgency. Like maybe I'd just gotten distracted by a sale at the grocery store or wandered off into the woods without my phone, and I'd be back in an hour with a casserole in hand. By day 5, the tone had shifted. More messages came in, now tinged with something resembling panic, but still dressed up in politeness. Hey Megan, are you okay? Let us know you're safe. Safe. That word hit differently when you know the person saying it doesn't actually worry about your safety, just the appearance of worrying. Rachel sent me a voice memo, all soft and concerned, trying to sound like someone who hadn't been posting beach selfies just 24 hours earlier. Hey Meg, we're kind of freaking out. Please just tell us if you're okay. No pressure. I know you're upset, but we love you. That was the first time I laughed in days. Not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly scripted. That girl could have won an Emmy for pretending to care. But it was Antonice who surprised me the most. She messaged me directly, which I had left open, just for her. If you need time, take it. I told them not to push. Just know I see you. I always have. And those last 5 words hit me harder than anything else. I didn't respond. Not yet. I wasn't ready. I was still building the silence, still watching how far it would stretch before they finally admitted to themselves that maybe, just maybe, they'd pushed too far this time. I spent that week clearing out the last traces of my digital presence in their world. Bank accounts, delivery addresses, even the backup emergency contact I'd filled in on my employer's form, it had always been Mom. I changed it to a colleague. Blocked their numbers, archived our chat history, even logged out of my main email. Not because I wanted to hurt them, but because I wanted to see what would happen if I truly removed myself from their lives, not in theory, not emotionally, but practically completely. And then, with a kind of peace I hadn't felt since childhood, I sat by the lake one morning, drinking coffee from a chipped mug, wrapped in a flannel I'd found in a closet. And I let myself imagine what their faces looked like when they opened the front door to find the hall empty, my keys gone, and the room I had paid rent on for 5 years stripped bare. I imagined Mom standing there, trying to keep her voice steady while calling my name, and Dad asking if I'd said anything before I left. I imagined Rachel pretending to be shocked, as if she didn't already know this day had been coming for a long time. They would panic, then blame, then rationalize. That's how people like them process loss, not with introspection, not with ownership, but with stories that cast them as the confused, wounded heroes. And that was fine. Let them build whatever fiction they needed to make sense of it. Because I had finally learned something they never taught me growing up. Sometimes silence is louder than screaming, and absence, when deliberate, is the most articulate form of protest there is. They returned home on a Tuesday afternoon, a little earlier than I had expected, which made the entire unfolding of events that much more satisfying to witness, even from a distance. I wasn't there to see it with my own eyes, of course, but I knew exactly how it would play out. I knew their rhythms, their habits, their tells. And that was the advantage you gain when you've spent your whole life on the outskirts observing the people you were supposed to belong to. I could picture my mother stepping inside first, always with a sigh, annoyed by dust or a misplaced shoe or some minor imperfection in the universe she pretended to control. My father would follow behind her, carrying suitcases that weren't his, pausing in the doorway like a man uncertain of his role, while Rachel would float in last, likely still in vacation mode, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors and checking her phone for the 100th time to see how many likes her sunset photos had gathered. The first thing they would notice wasn't the absence of me, it was the absence of routine. No meal prep containers in the fridge with my handwriting on the lids, no stack of forwarded mail arranged by date on the kitchen counter, no hum from my laptop in the corner of the dining room table where I used to work while pretending I didn't hear them talking about me like I wasn't there. It would creep up on them slowly, like the way grief doesn't always arrive with a bang but settles in with a series of small, unignorable changes. A coat missing from the hallway hook. A toothbrush gone from the shared bathroom. My bedroom door, which had always been slightly ajar, now wide open and stripped clean, not dramatically empty like in movies, but meticulously vacant, every drawer cleared, every sign of presence erased with purpose. And still, they probably wouldn't panic, not right away. They would assume I was out, or that maybe I was giving them space, sulking somewhere, playing what they'd call one of my emotional chess games. That was how they explained my boundaries whenever I dared to enforce them, not as acts of self-preservation, but as dramatics. Because people like them, people who always expected access, didn't know how to process denial without branding it as an attack. But as the hours passed and I didn't come home, and the family group chat remained unanswered, I imagined something shifted. Maybe it started with Rachel sending a lazy, "Where are you?" followed by a few passive-aggressive question marks. Maybe my mother started making calls first to my phone, then to my work, then to Aunt Denise when no one picked up. That's when the real unraveling began. Denise knew everything. She had known for weeks. She was the only one I had trusted with my plan, not because I needed validation, but because I knew she wouldn't try to talk me out of it, not after the years she'd spent quietly witnessing the way I was treated, always from a distance, always with that subtle tilt of the head that said, "You deserve better, but I know you won't get it here." She played her role brilliantly. When my mother called her in a frenzy, probably trying to hide the shake in her voice, Denise didn't lie. But she didn't give away the truth either. She simply said, "I'm sure Megan's okay. She's smart. She'll be in touch when she's ready." No details, no hint of location, no promises of contact. It was the kind of controlled ambiguity that drove people like my mother absolutely insane, because it stripped her of her illusion of control without giving her anything to fight. The first voicemail from my sister came the next day, long and meandering, full of performative guilt and soft-voiced apologies that barely skimmed the surface of what she'd done. She kept saying she didn't realize I was so hurt, as if pain needs to come with neon signs or tears in public in order to be considered real. She said she missed me, that the trip wasn't the same without me, which was a bold lie considering she'd spent the entire time posting pictures of her and her friends sipping cocktails in infinity pools while I was driving through Wisconsin in silence, trying to forget the sound of her voice saying, "You're not really a vacation person, are you?" The second voicemail was shorter, more clipped, with frustration hiding behind every word. "Look, Megan, I don't know what this is about, but you're acting crazy. This disappearing act? It's not cute, okay? You're scaring Mom and Dad." That was the tell. Not "we're scared for you," but "you're scaring them." Their concern wasn't for me, it was for how my actions might reflect on them, for the inconvenience of my silence, not its meaning. The real surprise came on the third day, when my father, who rarely spoke unless prompted and never reached out without some ulterior reason, sent me an email. Just one sentence, "Let us know if you're alive." That was it. No greeting, no punctuation, no attempt to soften it with concern or curiosity. Just an obligation checked off. It was almost poetic in its brevity, like a man who knew he should care but didn't know how to perform it convincingly. I didn't reply. Instead, I watched their confusion bloom from a safe distance. I checked the group chat once, just to see if they were still talking around me, and what I found was exactly what I had expected, a digital search party of speculation and assumption. Do you think she's mad because of the trip? Maybe she met someone and didn't want to tell us? She always was a little intense. That last one came from Rachel. Of course it did. The irony of her calling me intense while she documented every meal she ate on vacation like it was a sacred ritual was not lost on me. But the messages slowed after that, thinned out, and then eventually stopped altogether. That was the part that hurt the most, if I'm honest, not the silence I created, but the ease with which they adapted to it. It was almost like I had been right all along. I wasn't needed. I wasn't essential. I had been playing a role in a story that didn't require me anymore. And yet, something strange happened in that emptiness, something I hadn't expected. I didn't feel sad. I felt free. Free in a way that was unfamiliar and a little terrifying, like stepping out onto a frozen lake and realizing, for the first time, that you don't need to get to the other side, you can just stand there and breathe. That's when I started writing the letter. Not a letter to them, no. They didn't deserve explanations anymore, but a letter to myself. To the version of me that used to wait by the phone hoping someone would remember her birthday, or ask how her day was, or include her in the photo album. A letter that began with, "You were right to leave," and ended with, "Now don't go back." And somewhere in the middle of it all, I realized something I hadn't let myself admit until then. They would never understand why I left, and that was the entire point. Because understanding requires listening, and listening requires respect, and they had never offered me either. So let them sit with their unanswered questions, their half-formed theories, their carefully constructed narratives. Let them wonder. I wasn't missing. I was choosing not to be found. It came exactly 2 weeks after they'd returned from their perfect, meticulously filtered Mediterranean adventure, a vacation so heavily documented it might as well have been a sponsored influencer campaign, not a family getaway, and by then, I had already memorized the patterns of their collective silence, their frantic concern that had slowly crumbled into passive frustration, and finally their attempt to reclaim the narrative through the only method they understood: performance. When I opened the email from a disposable account I'd been using just to monitor what might drift in from the edges of my old life, I saw the subject line in all caps: Rachel's video. Please watch, and I knew, even before clicking play, that it would be the kind of apology that isn't really an apology at all, but a well-staged appeal for sympathy, cloaked in just enough emotion to appear sincere to anyone who didn't know how hollow it really was underneath. The video opened with her sitting on the front porch, the very one I used to sweep every Saturday morning while she was still asleep upstairs, claiming she needed emotional rest, a phrase she'd lifted from a self-care blog and clung to as justification for her habitual avoidance of anything that resembled effort. Her hair was tousled just enough to suggest authenticity, her makeup applied in a way that made her look effortlessly distressed, and I could tell, even through the screen, that she had probably rehearsed it a dozen times before hitting record. The words came out slow, careful, each one hanging in the air as though weighted with unbearable guilt, and yet, the longer she spoke, the more it became clear that the person she was trying to comfort was herself, not me. She said she never intended to hurt me, which was laughable considering how many times she'd done it before, not with sharp, cruel attacks, but with those small, calculated dismissals that slip past most people's radar but land like daggers in the hearts of those already accustomed to being ignored. She said she missed her sister, which would have been more believable if she had ever treated me like one, and not as some perpetual understudy in the family play, always expected to smile politely from the wings while she soaked up every round of applause. She talked about how hard it had been to come home and find the house empty, how my absence had shaken the family, and how they all just wanted answers, but not once did she ask the real question, the only one that mattered, which was why I had left in the first place. Because asking would have required her to look at her own role in it, and Rachel, despite all her emotional performances, had never been very good at self-reflection. As the video ended with her whispering, "Please come home," I felt something inside me harden, not into anger, not into resentment, but into a kind of final clarity that had been building for years and was only now crystallizing into something permanent. She didn't want me back because she missed me. She wanted me back because my absence made her look bad. It disrupted the illusion of our perfect little family unit, exposed the fault lines they had worked so hard to paint over with brunch photos and holiday cards and staged group hugs. I was a missing piece, but not because I mattered, because without me, the story didn't look as good. What none of them realized, even now, was that I hadn't just walked away, I had redefined the terms of my existence. And part of that process, as difficult as it had been, required me to face some ugly truths about my own behavior too. I had allowed them to shape me into someone useful, dependable, quiet, always available. I had played my part with precision, internalized every unspoken rule, ignored every instinct that screamed for me to stand up and demand more. But that version of me no longer existed, and the person they were now trying to coax back didn't owe them anything, not comfort, not closure, and certainly not the satisfaction of a reunion staged for emotional effect. So I did something I had thought about doing for years, but had never had the courage to act on. I pulled out the folder that held my most private, carefully guarded documents, my will, my savings plan, my beneficiary forms, and I rewrote them. Every account, every policy, every potential inheritance that had once included their names was scrubbed clean. I left everything to Aunt Denise, the only person in my family who had never once asked me to shrink myself to make room for others. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the symbolism of it all, the quiet power of declaring that my legacy, whatever small footprint I left behind, would be passed on to someone who had seen me, truly seen me, even when everyone else looked the other way. I mailed the documents in silence, certified and notarized. No return address, no cover letter. I didn't need to explain myself. I wanted them to open the envelope and feel the weight of it, not just the paper, but what it represented, the final confirmation that I had removed them from every part of my future, just as they had slowly, systematically removed me from their present. Of course, the reaction was immediate and dramatic, as I knew it would be. More emails, more voicemails, this time tinged with desperation, confusion, rage thinly disguised as concern. My mother left a message sobbing, asking how I could be so cruel, how I could do this to them, how I could cut off the people who loved me most. And all I could think, as I sat by the lake with the wind threading through my hair and the sky turning soft and violet with dusk, was that love, if it ever really existed between us, should not have felt like obligation wrapped in guilt and shame and duty. Real love does not ask you to disappear for the comfort of others. Real love does not expect you to keep showing up just so no one else has to feel uncomfortable. I didn't respond to the video. I didn't call back. I didn't send an email or a letter or even a sarcastic reaction to the group chat where they had tried to spin the situation into some kind of miscommunication. Because it wasn't a miscommunication. It was the first time I had ever communicated clearly. My silence wasn't a mistake, it was the clearest I had ever spoken in my life. They wanted to pretend none of it had happened. That the Greece thing was a blip. That my leaving was a phase. That their selective blindness wasn't a wound, but some kind of oversight they could fix with brunch invitations and family therapy coupons. So I gave them what they wanted. I gave them exactly that. Nothing. 6 months had passed since I last heard any of their voices, and in that time, not a single moment had arrived where I found myself regretting my silence, not even in the quietest hours of the early morning. When the only sound in the cabin was the wind tapping against the windows or the occasional groan of the wooden beams expanding in the cold. What surprised me most wasn't the absence of guilt or longing, but the strange and unexpected peace that had settled in its place, an unfamiliar yet welcome kind of stillness that grew deeper with each passing week. Like my nervous system was finally learning to stop flinching at the idea of being alone. The world outside moved on, as it always does, but for me, life became something slower, simpler, and far more honest than it had ever been when I was wrapped inside that web of forced obligation and emotional theater my family called love. I kept expecting some part of me to miss them, to crave the chaos, the passive-aggressive texts, the overly cheerful calls that always came with strings attached, the endless cycle of birthdays and holidays and guilt-laced invitations. But the only things I ever really missed were the ideas I had once clung to, the illusions I had nurtured like dying houseplants in a dark room, hoping they might somehow bloom. I missed the version of my mother that I used to imagine would one day see me, not for what I could do or how little I asked for, but for who I was when no one was demanding anything. I missed the version of Rachel that I told myself might, with enough time and growth, learn to see me not as a rival or a shadow, but as a sister, an equal, someone whose presence could be celebrated instead of tolerated. But those versions of them had never truly existed outside my imagination, and what I had mistaken for hope had only been my own stubborn refusal to face the truth that some people will only ever love the version of you that doesn't inconvenience them. It was a gray Tuesday in early spring when Aunt Denise showed up unannounced, her car tires crunching the gravel outside the cabin with that familiar sound that immediately transported me back to the childhood summers we used to spend together. Back before the weight of family politics began suffocating everything. She didn't text, didn't call ahead, just appeared on the porch with a cardboard tray of 2 black coffees and a brown paper bag of something warm. She didn't say hello right away. Instead, she handed me the coffee, sat on the wooden step beside me, and pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders like we were preparing for some kind of emotional storm. I asked if she wanted to come inside, but she shook her head gently and said, "No need. We're fine right here." She didn't press, didn't prod, didn't fill the silence with questions she already knew the answers to, and that, more than anything, reminded me why she had been the only one I had chosen to remain connected to. After a few minutes of slow sipping and shared silence, she finally asked the question I had been both expecting and dreading. "Do you miss them?" It hung in the air for a moment longer than it needed to, and I could feel the weight of it settle into my chest, not like a wound reopening, but more like a ghost brushing past a half-healed bruise. I thought about how to answer, not because I didn't know, but because I wanted to make sure I said it honestly, without the dramatics or the rehearsed bitterness that had become my armor. "No," I said finally, and then, after a pause, added, "I miss the version of them I used to hope existed." She nodded, as if she understood exactly what I meant, and I think she did. More than anyone, she knew that grief wasn't always about loss. It was often about accepting that what you thought you had was never really there to begin with. She stayed for a few hours, and we talked about everything and nothing: her job, the strange little town nearby, the birds that had started nesting under the porch roof, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to laugh without wondering who was listening, without bracing for someone to cut me off or hijack the moment. When she left, she hugged me tightly and said, "You're not broken. You're just free." And sometimes, people confuse those two things. That night, I pulled out an old box I had stashed under the bed, the one with the last remaining photos of us together as a family: birthdays, graduations, holidays where I was always standing at the edge of the frame, half-cropped, half-smiling, always holding a plate or a purse or a child that wasn't mine. I laid them out on the floor, one by one, like puzzle pieces I was no longer trying to fit together. Some of the faces looked younger, some happier, some unaware of the fractures already forming beneath the surface, but all of them felt like relics from a world I no longer belonged to. I didn't burn them. I didn't tear them up in some dramatic display of closure. I simply went through each one, slowly, and with every picture, I asked myself whether I wanted that memory to follow me into whatever life I was building now. Most of them I let go. A few I kept, not because they held joy, but because they reminded me of how far I had come, how much I had survived, how thoroughly I had unlearned the belief that I needed to earn my place in the world by making myself small. In the morning, I woke up early, made coffee, and stepped out onto the porch barefoot, feeling the cold wood against my skin, the breeze sharp and clean against my face. I watched the lake ripple in the distance, calm and endless, and I realized that I didn't need to go back to anything. I didn't need to explain myself or offer closure or accept apologies that were never really meant for me. I didn't need their approval or their understanding or even their forgiveness. What I needed, and what I had finally given myself, was space. Room to breathe. Room to exist. They said I wouldn't enjoy Greece. That I wasn't the type for travel or fun or celebration. That I wouldn't fit in, wouldn't relax, wouldn't understand the value of a luxury experience. They said it with smug certainty, the way people do when they've already decided your role and can't imagine you ever stepping outside it. But they were right about one thing. I didn't enjoy Greece. I enjoyed the silence after. The distance. The absence. I enjoyed my freedom more.